Now we're going to talk about a little bit of an overview of verbs or verb phrases. So in the last video, we talked about how every sentence in English contains a noun phrase and a verb phrase. So the verb phrase can be the main verb in a sentence. And your book mentions several types of verbs, but the main two that we really discuss in teaching are action versus stative verbs. So action verbs, your book calls them dynamic verbs, can describe actions. So they can be used with any progressive tense. And we'll go into the tenses in more detail in our week where we go over verb tenses. So progressive tense describes actions. So for example, the present progressive. What am I doing right now? I am talking. I am creating a video. Hopefully you are watching my video and you are listening to my video. So those were all action verbs. So verbs that we can actually decide to actually do that action, and we can use them in the progressive tenses. Stative verbs describe states of being. So they can not be used with any of the progressive tenses. And those are the verbs that made up our second type of verb phrases in the last video. So the stative verbs can be followed by a noun phrase, an adjective phrase, or a prepositional phrase. So for example, the be verb is a stative verb. There's no action with the be verb. So for example, I could say Kelly is a teacher. There's a state verb is followed by a noun phrase, a teacher. I could say Kelly is in her guest room. So then we have the state verb is followed by a prepositional phrase, in her guest room. Kelly is tired. So there we have a state verb followed by an adjective phrase, tired. Okay, so what are these state verbs? Your book talks about them in pretty big detail, but I'm going to show you the categories of state verbs that I show to my ESL students. So when I break down stative verbs for my ESL students, I break them down into mental states. So verbs that describe something that's happening in our head. So for example, I know the answer to that question. So no, that's not an action. You either know something or you don't. I believe that he is an honest person. Again, to believe is not an action. It's something you almost feel. To not understand or to understand, you either do or you don't. It's not an action. Emotions are stative verbs. So love, dislike, fear, you can't perform an action of emotions. You either feel something or you don't. I love grammar class. The students dislike it when they have too much homework. My dog fears the sound of thunder. So those are states, those are feelings, they're not actions. Although someone always brings up, and some of you might be thinking this, what about that McDonald's commercial? I'm loving it. Well, the more we talk about grammar, the more you'll realize that there's a difference between prescriptive grammar or the rules of grammar that you'll see in grammar books and the way people actually use it in speaking. So when someone says, I'm loving it, or I'm loving that dress on you, it's informal spoken language, which is different from a grammar rule you'll read in a book. Ownership. All verbs that describe ownership are stative. So own, possess, belong. Sam owns a new red car. Martha possesses the ability to remember every conversation. The cute dog over there belongs to me. Okay, ownership. Those are not actions. Sense perceptions. Sense perceptions are kind of fun because some of them can be stative or action verbs depending on the context. So, for example, hear is not an action. Oh, I hear a noise. It's just something that happens to you. But if you actually actively want to listen to the noise, then you would say, I'm listening. Okay? When we talk about how we feel, I feel tired, but I'm feeling my dog's fur. It depends on the context. Or smell. The flower smells good. That's descriptive. It's describing the scent of the flower. It's not an action. But if we say Kelly is smelling the flower, well, then that is an action. So sense perceptions, it kind of depends on the context. So those are kind of fun. Okay, also when we're talking about verbs, we also need to talk about inflection, or what we call tense. So what tense are we using, as well as person. So does the verb agree with the subject? And in English, person is a lot easier than a lot of other languages where the ending of the verb changes depending on the subject. But in English, in the simple present, the only ending that changes is third person singular. So for example, if you have the verb go, the only subject that would change the form of the word go is he, she, or it, third person singular. He, she, it goes. Every other subject, I go, you go, they go, we go, it doesn't change. Person is not difficult in English. What is difficult in English is tense. Sorry, I'm a big grammar nerd, so you see me getting excited here. I get really excited about grammar because it fascinates me. So in English, there are 12 verb tenses. What? Who needs 12 verb tenses? You're right, we don't. We don't need them all. But we have them. Okay, so we have simple present, present progressive, simple past, past progressive, present perfect, present perfect progressive, past perfect, past perfect progressive, future, which in the regular simple future we use will or be going to. We'll talk about that in our chapter over verb tenses. Future progressive, future perfect, future perfect progressive. Whew, did I get them all? You're probably wondering, do we actually teach all those? It depends on the program. Some programs, teach all 12. Some are now starting to say more like, we should really focus on the verb tenses that are used most often, which we do. We focus a lot more on the ones that are used most often, and also the ones that are the most problematic for students, like present perfect. Present perfect is a big problematic one. And we focus very little, if at all, on the ones that are rarely used, such as future perfect. I think I catch myself using future perfect or future perfect progressive once or twice a year. What's future perfect? By the time my husband gets home tonight, I will have finished dinner. Yeah, no one talks like that. No one talks like that. So we're not going to worry too much about those. But I mean, generally in an academic ESL program where maybe there are 5 levels of grammar, we used to have 5 levels here at Harper. Now we have 4. In level 5, they would teach the future perfect tenses and future perfect progressive, but we only go up to level 4 now. So anyway, so when we get to the chapter on verbs, we'll talk a little bit more about which ones we teach, which ones we focus on, and how to teach those. Okay, so we talked about action verbs versus stative verbs, person, tense. What else is important when we're talking about teaching verbs in English and verb phrases? Helping verbs or auxiliary verbs. So helping verbs if there is one in a sentence, so for example, if we have let's go back to the present progressive tense. I am talking to you right now. I am creating a video. The helping verb is the be verb, am, okay? They always come before the main verb. They always agree in number with the subject, I, so it's am, okay? They also take the tense. So, for example, if we want to do the negative, past tense negative, I didn't watch your video. So there we have the helping verb, do, to create the negative, and it's past tense. I didn't watch your video. So helping verbs also take the tense. Another type of verb, which we'll talk about this semester, and is a big part of teaching in an ESL or an EFL class, are modal verbs. So modal verbs are another type of helping verb, and they're a big part of that sociolinguistic competence that we talked about in my first video. So modal verbs talk about possibility, necessity, advice, certainty. Okay, so certainty. How certain are you that you will pass this class? I will pass this class. I'm 100% certain. I should pass this class. I'm like 90% certain. Or advice. What should I do tonight? You should stay home and study. So those are modal verbs. They give those extra meanings to the sentence. And like I said, they're a big part of the sociolinguistic competence of your students because they also do things like politeness. Okay, so when you're meeting someone for the first time or you're addressing your professor and you have a polite request, would you use, would you mind, could I, may I, can I, depending on who you're talking to. Okay, and we'll talk more about those verbs when we get to our chapter on modals. I already talked about that do verb. Do comes up a lot in ESL and EFL settings because students really don't understand why we add this when we're talking about the negative. Like, I don't understand. In a lot of languages, they just add a negative, like, no, I know, understand. But we add this helping verb, do. And also in the past tense for the negative. And also for questions, right? Yes, no questions. Did you go to work yesterday? So all of a sudden we have this extra helping verb when we're talking about the negative and questions. Transitive and intransitive. So transitive just means that it's followed by an object. Kelly baked a cake. Intransitive verbs means they cannot be followed by an object, like the sun rises. It doesn't rise something else, right? The dog, sorry, I'm looking at my dog and thinking about this. The dog, Sally, you want to be in the picture? She's going under the blankets. The dog lies on the bed. I was thinking past tense. Okay? Lie. But Kelly lays the dog on the bed, right? Lay is transitive, lie is intransitive. Okay, and finally, phrasal verbs. So a lot of verbs in English are made up of more than one word. So that's another thing we have to teach students. And we use phrasal verbs often in speaking. Native speakers do. Okay, so for example, you put your laundry away, put away. You turn in your homework. You take out dinner. Okay, so that's an overview of verbs in English and what is a verb phrase? What are the different types of verbs in English? What are the different tenses in English? We will get to a chapter on verb tense as well as modal verbs, and we'll discuss these topics and issues that students have with learning verbs and different examples of how to teach verbs later in the semester.